Welcome to the Tisch WNET studio here in the heart of Lincoln Center. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce Norah O'Donnell. You know her. Wake up in the morning to her. To co-host CBS This Morning. How you doing?
Great. I get up pretty early in the morning,
How
but
early?
It's the best job I've ever had.
How early?
Sometimes 4 o'clock, sometimes earlier. Depends on what's the news of the day, what the type of guests we may have that day. But like anybody, I try and sleep as late as I can.
I told you before, we had one of your colleagues in here recently. Charlie Rose, he knows our world very well, the public broadcasting world. But the other guest, the other colleague you had, Gail
King.
is sitting in that chair just a few months back complaining about she said we didn't pay our electric bill, it was too cold. You think it's just fine, don't you?
I think it's just fine in here, yes.
She's
Not to disagree with my dear friend Gail King.
She's a character.
Yeah, she's so much fun. And if you watch our show, you'll see how much chemistry there is between Charlie and Gail and myself. And it's the stuff that TV executives work to try and make. And certainly when I joined the show, we didn't know that we would have that, but we were instantly friends. And hopefully that shows, every morning on the show, because it makes it fun for us to do the show. And so people say that's what they like to see.
And your executive producer is a good friend of ours.
Yes, our executive producer, Chris Licht, who I had worked with over at MSNBC. He created Morning Joe.
Yep,
and now he has helped to recreate CBS This Morning. And we've now had the highest ratings for our show in the past 20 years.
By the way, I'm also plugging, because log on to our site, you'll see the interview that we did with Chris just a few months back as well. Because you've had such an interesting background in broadcasting, you come to this situation. Morning television, very different than the work you had been doing at NBC, real newsy stuff, MSNBC stuff. You and I actually did some stuff together, real newsy stuff when I was a media analyst over at MSNBC. It was very hardcore news.
Well, my background is in political reporting.
Yes.
So I covered the White House, I covered Congress, I covered the Pentagon.
Yes.
I've covered 5 different presidential elections. I traveled around the globe with Secretary Rumsfeld after 9/11, including to Afghanistan, all over the world. So my background was in political reporting. And then I was asked to come and co-host here in New York and do a morning show. And
Reluctant at all?
No, because I was just filling in for somebody and just came up to, and they said, wow, you're so good, we'd like to offer you the job. So yes, I was reluctant because my life, and I have 3 young kids, was in Washington, D.C., but it's New York City. And, I think one of the things I learned, as a professional was to take risks, and this was an adventure and go on the adventure. And, to have the opportunity to co-host a morning show is kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, because I do believe that morning TV is the crown jewel of broadcast journalism.
Really?
I do.
No longer, hey, the evening news at 6, no, that's not it?
Well, look, you get 2 hours at least of television in the morning. The evening news is usually it's 30 minutes, but after commercials, it's about 20 minutes. So you'll see sometimes the profit center at some of the networks is in the morning. We get the opportunity to sort of set the agenda in the morning. If something has been breaking overnight, we get the first crack at the news,
right.
Whether it's interviewing the head of the CDC or the vice president of the United States after a major world news event. A lot of stuff happens on morning television, and I think that's where a lot of people always want to watch. Right when they get up in the morning, turn on the coffee, get the information they need to know before they get out the door. And what we're doing at CBS is we say the news is back in the morning. You don't see cooking segments on our show. You don't see concerts. What we're doing is original reporting and great storytelling in the tradition of CBS News.
Well, let's talk more about that. I told you before we got on the air that one of the interviews that you did recently, we're doing this toward the back end of 2014. We'll see how things play out. But the NFL in the news, big time in terms of this ongoing domestic violence situation. Ray Rice situation just triggered it. Mm-hmm. You did the exclusive, the most in-depth interview that I've seen with Roger Goodell. We're looking at some video of it right now. Mm-hmm. When you were sitting there with him, asking him very tough questions, he's responding however he chooses to, however he was prepped to, his business. Did you know you had something special?
Well, look, this was an incredibly important story, because while domestic violence has been a problem in the NFL for a long time, and we've seen the reports of players being arrested, this was the first time we had video of a player, Ray Rice of the Baltimore Ravens, actually punching out his then girlfriend. So it was hard to deny when you visually see exactly what happened. We had the first interview with Roger Goodell, and many people sort of asked me, was it tense in the room? Was it difficult? I felt like I just asked very simple, straightforward questions, which is, why the NFL hadn't seen this second tape, why no one in the NFL had seen this tape, despite the fact that the NFL has some of the best security in the country. They hire everybody, former FBI directors, everybody. So it was a pretty straightforward interview, and I think that interview will stand the test of time as we learn more and the NFL conducts its own investigation about why they didn't know the second tape. But I looked at that interview as an interesting opportunity. As someone who interviews presidents and secretaries of defense, this was different for me to interview someone in the sports world, but the same questions are there. You know, why didn't you know? Was there a cover-up? Leadership questions.
Leadership questions. It's interesting. As a student of leadership who tries to look at every situation in terms of how someone handles leadership, you've interviewed world leaders. You've interviewed President Obama.
Yeah.
When you interview him, a lot of folks we've had sit in this seat come from some of the cable news networks that you know very well, previous background there. A lot of those folks said, yeah, I have an orientation. I have a political orientation. And yes, that orientation does in fact influence my questioning. Yeah. Does yours?
I don't. You know, I'm an objective journalist. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I am right down the middle, and that's how I ask my questions.
You don't even care who's sitting in that seat in terms of their ideology or yours.
Look, I think if you look at my Twitter feed or some of the responses, you know,
by the way,
someone
you've
is
been
accusing me of
putting up yours the whole time. People can find out. Go ahead.
Yeah, someone is accusing me of bias on one side or bias on the other side. The most important thing to me is, and I take very seriously my job as a journalist, is that it is very important to question leaders and people in positions of power. And I think the media has a responsibility to do that as straightforward as they can and try and get the answers for the people. A good example, the reporter at the Washington Post, Carol Linning, who has done the reporting on these Secret Service failures. The Secret Service told all of us, told the American people, that this intruder only got to the north portico door of the White House. Had it not been for the media, we would not have known that this intruder actually made 100 feet into the White House, past the stairway that goes right up to the private residence.
And did have a knife. In the initial AP report said he was unarmed.
That's
not
right.
true, only exposed because of the media.
Right. That's only the most recent example.
As we speak right now.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about the NSA and what our government's been doing in terms of spying on people. We can go all the way back to Watergate about the important role that the media plays. So I take that role and responsibility very seriously.
Can I ask you about that book you have right there?
Oh, yes.
Baby Love.
My other
what's this segue? None at all.
My other very important responsibility are these three people. My little
Bob, can we get a shot of this?
My little jewels, Grace, Henry, and Riley. There you can see we were at the Cherry Blossom Festival. They're a little bigger now, but we wrote this book. My husband, there you see there, he's a chef in Washington. Chef Jeff's is the name of his.
Chef?
Jeff's.
Go ahead.
In Washington. He has 6 restaurants. And when my kids were born, we decided to make their baby food from scratch. And the interesting thing that I learned is, as someone who's not a good cook, and I'm married to a chef, that making baby food is pretty easy. It's just like making applesauce or puree. That it's important in building a healthy lifestyle for your children for the rest of their life. If you start them as infants eating healthy, they're going to eat healthy as 7-year-olds and as teenagers and for life. Because
that's what that book is about?
Yeah, it's about feeding your kids. There's also, for their parents, there's also a margarita recipe in the back because it is called, as I say, it's called Baby Love. It's not about making babies, but.
And by the way, you've run half marathons, you've run all kinds of races, right?
I run half marathons.
And
I ran the Brooklyn half. I ran the Brooklyn. And there's the Philadelphia. I've run 2 half marathons, so.
And the drinking is after?
I don't drink after I run because that's not a good idea. But when I'm not running, I do enjoy a nice glass of wine or a margarita.
And by the way, your favorite recipe?
My favorite recipe in here? I mean, butternut squash.
I asked the hard questions.
Yeah. There's Alba's chicken noodle soup is something I still eat to this day because I love chicken noodle soup, especially, you know, as it gets cold out. It's a good thing to have, especially when you've got a cold.
You're also involved in some important causes.
I am.
Go ahead.
I sit on the board of the International Women's Media Foundation. We recognize women around the world, journalists who are trying to expose corruption, whatever it may be, who put their own lives at risk. These are some of the bravest women I have ever met. It's an organization I just got involved in as I came here to New York. I also do a lot for multiple sclerosis. And back in Washington, D.C., sit on that board, people who have multiple sclerosis. It's affected my family, so it's an organization that I'm involved in, and whatever I can do to help.
How about military families? You come from a military background?
I do. I come from a military background.
Describe that.
Well, my father's from Staten Island, and my mom is from Queens. And
Whoa. You do not have an accent, not that I generalize.
Well, let me explain.
I'm from New Jersey, so
okay,
I can.
yeah.
Where's your...
Well, here's why. Because my dad was, while he was in med school down at St. Vincent's in the West Village, he was drafted into the Army during the Vietnam War, and then he stayed in for 30 years, was a doctor in the Army. So we lived all over the world. So lived in Germany and mostly grew up in Texas. So I, went to middle school and high school in Texas. But I think and now I have a younger sister who's a surgeon who's also in the U.S. Army. So my family tries to do a lot now for military families. Certainly my sister is helping wounded warriors recover. But my parents have been involved in causes helping our military. And there's, I think, no greater need than people that are returning who've been serving in the longest war in American history. I think they're sometimes forgotten, our wounded warriors. And as much as my job in the media to bring attention to the service and sacrifice of them, we try and do a lot of those stories.
Before I let you out of here. You've accomplished a great deal in media and journalism broadcasting. When were you pretty sure that this was the world you wanted to go into, professionally?
It's interesting because I don't remember this except that my parents, because my dad was in the military, we were always reading the newspapers. And I can remember, as a teenager being embarrassed because my mom would let the newspapers stack up because she wanted to read every little bit of the newspapers. We always had the Journal of Medicine everywhere, magazines and Time and National Geographic. So that was part of growing up, the news. And friends have told me that I used to, imitate Barbara Walters when I was a young girl, take the bench that was at the end of the bed and imitate Barbara Walters. So I think it was something I grew up in college. I thought maybe I wanted to go into medicine. I thought maybe I wanted to be a lawyer. And then I got an internship in the news business. And then it clicked and I started off as a print journalist. So, how sometimes people say it's something you've wanted to be for a long time, you end up being. I think it was there from a very early age. One
more quickie. The one interview you haven't done yet that you really want to do is?
Well, Kim Jong-il of North Korea, Vladimir Putin of Moscow, Justin Timberlake.
Wait a minute, hold on.
Not that they have any, sorry, Justin Timberlake, you have nothing in common with Kim Jong-il, but I think you're great.
But there are questions to ask Justin Timberlake.
Oh, yeah, he does very few interviews. So, Justin, if you're listening, give me a ring.
I think you have a better shot at Kim Jong-il. Norah O'Donnell, a co-host of the CBS Morning News with our colleague here in public broadcasting, Charlie Rose, and the great Gayle
King.
She's the best.
And congratulations to Charlie Rose on his Emmy for his PBS and CBS interview of President Bashar Assad of Syria. Congratulations to PBS.
You're a great colleague.
Yeah.
By the way, could you tell Gayle that we have the heating fixed here in public broadcasting at the Tisch WNET studio? Could you tell her that?
I will. I will tell her.
And you love our studio.
I do. This is incredible.
All right.
Beautiful. You're very fortunate.
Tell her Neil Shapiro, the boss, got everything fixed.
And by the way, Neil Shapiro hired me at NBC, one of the greatest guys.
He has an eye for talent.
Yeah.
That's why we're here.
Very good guy.
Thanks, Norah.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
It. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you. Yeah.
Stay with us. We'll be right back right after this. That's funny.
One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation, celebrating over 25 years of broadcast excellence. This special edition of One-on-One with Steve Adubato is brought to you from the Tisch WNET studios at Lincoln Center. Funding has been provided by Hackensack University Health Network, County College of Morris, New Jersey Council of County Colleges, MD Advantage, activists in cooperation with the American Medicine Chest Challenge, TD Bank, and by PSE&G. Promotional support provided by Commerce Magazine and by New Jersey Monthly, the magazine of the Garden State, available at newsstands. Transportation provided by Airbrook Limousine, serving the metropolitan New York, New Jersey area.